What's up, Internet? Today I'm presenting you with my top 10 anime of 2022. Feel free to skip ahead if you want to get straight to it, but before I begin, I just wanted to talk about how my list was made and what I'll be going over. 1. I'm only considering the shows that I watched. I watch a lot of anime, but I can't watch everything. Some of the bigger shows I didn't watch during the year include Cyberpunk Edgerunners, Summertime Rendering, Made in Abyss, or One Piece. So those shows were not in consideration for my top 10. 2. This is going to be a spoiler-free list. I'm not going to talk about any specific late-game events, character deaths, or the outcomes of any major conflicts. I'll also be avoiding big events in the footage I use, so you won't be spoiled by anything you see. In fact, I'll only be using footage from the first 7 episodes of a show, or in the event that a show aired in 2 halves, the first 7 episodes of each half. So between cutting around big events and not even using footage from later episodes, you can rest assured that you're most likely not going to be seeing any major spoilers. However, I do talk about things like plot structure, themes, character progression, the major tones or emotions of a show, and early developments. Also, please keep in mind that previous seasons of a show will be fair game. So if I'm talking about a show with multiple seasons, I may still spoil the previous ones. And since this is a non-spoiler top 10, I may not be able to go into full detail about what influenced my ranking. So if it seems like I don't fully justify a show's placement on my list, it may be because I was talking around a potential spoiler. And finally, my criteria. Honestly, I'm just looking for overall quality. I'm keeping an eye out for things like well-written characters, smart comedy, complex drama, stellar animation, and cerebral action. I don't really limit myself to any one thing or particular genre. I just try to consider all of those things and how well a show does them. Some shows may do 5 things very well, and other shows may do 1 or 2 things with near perfection. Both of those shows could make my list and be right next to each other. In fact, I'll be honest, on a scale of 1 to 10, the shows on my list are probably within 1.5 points of each other. That's how close it was in some cases. Anyway, that about covers everything I wanted to say, so without further ado, let's jump on into it. Number 10, Komi Can't Communicate Season 2. I doubt many people had this one in their top 10 of the year, but to me, Season 2 of Komi Can't Communicate was a great blend of comedy and mild drama that not only stood on its own, but surpassed its predecessor. If you're new to Komi Can't Communicate, the show follows a socially anxious Komi as she pursues her goal of making 100 friends in high school, assisted by her first friend Tadano. It's essentially a slice-of-life comedy with light drama and light romance. It's also adapted from a very popular manga, the fans of which were very excited to see finally turned into an anime in 2021. And while I thought Season 1 was good, I didn't think it fully captured the magic of the manga. To me, it felt a little fast-paced and had a slight barrier of entry due to its large cast. The manga is this calm and humorous story in which characters are slowly introduced and relationships are gradually formed. In contrast, Season 1 of the anime seemed to hit the ground running, and as a result, lost some of the manga's charm. However, Season 2 was a vast improvement in my opinion. With the cast being mostly established, the plot had much more time to breathe and do what it does best. I thought it conveyed Komi's anxieties and fears much more effectively, presenting many more touching and relatable scenarios. You can't help but cheer for Komi as she yearns for connections but must contend with her anxiety. Watching her struggle in spite of herself and make progress while her friends push her to succeed feels very real. We've all had moments where we were nervous and wanted to reach out to someone. Season 2 of Komi takes that emotion, distills it, and gives the viewer the catharsis of triumphing over it. Of course, these situations rarely play out according to Komi's plans. The myriad of odd situations she stumbles into makes for many hilarious scenarios. After all, the show is primarily a comedy, and I thought it did a great job of presenting many well-timed moments and smartly written jokes. I found no shortage of clever setups, funny bits, and physical comedy. That near-constant funny payoff, coupled with the light drama of Komi's struggles, struck a nice balance between the comedic and cathartic. And underneath it all, of course, is that slow-moving, coming-of-age tale, continued from the first season. That light and youthful romance that's always humorous and sweet, devoid of fan service or any cringe elements. Without spoiling anything, it's the 3rd most prevalent aspect of the plot this season, behind the comedy and the drama of Komi's emotional growth. The romantic elements never overstay their welcome either. They come in, warm your heart, and depart before you get tired of them. Lastly, it just looked good. Not blow you away good, but good enough to tell that they upped the animation quality from the previous season and honed the art style even more. That extra degree of quality, combined with the increased efficiency of both comedy and drama, elevated the impact of every moment. Overall, I just found that the increased caliber of nearly every aspect of Season 2 of Komi Can't Communicate elevated the show to a level beyond that of its previous season. For that feat, as well as its quality on its own, I think it deserves to be included as one of the better shows of the year. Number 9, Akebi's Sailor Uniform. It's a funny coincidence that this show is right next to Komi Can't Communicate in my list. Not only does the main character also have Komi in her name, but the basic premise is very similar as well. A socially awkward and isolated girl starts school with hopes of making friends and forming bonds with her classmates. But two things make Akebi's Sailor Uniform very different. The first is that it's much more serious. The second is that the main character is in no way an introvert. Akebi is preparing to attend the same all-girls school her mother went to, but what she's looking forward to the most is the chance to wear the same kind of sailor uniform that her mother wore. Unfortunately, much to her embarrassment, she finds out on the first day that the school's uniform has since changed. I know some might call the show a drama, but that's a little inaccurate. There isn't really any conflict in the show. The bones of the story are basically that of a cute girls doing cute things slice of life, so you really can't call the show dramatic. I think it would be more accurate to call this show emotional. As Akebi gets to know her classmates, she connects with them on a deeply personal level. Her outgoing nature and earnest attitude make people open up to her, providing a path towards the poignant and intriguing lives of the cast. And as the show goes on, the viewer experiences Akebi's warmth and kind heart through the lenses of her classmates. She's the main character, but the show utilizes her as a spotlight for its rich and varied cast. A shy girl with a penchant for nature, the rudderless girl who strikes out and tries to learn something new, the unapproachable girl who pines for connection. This show revolves around immature characters with low-stakes problems, but their stories are incredibly deep and pleasing to watch. Each episode is an emotional and fulfilling vignette of youth and innocence. It's not fluffy or sugary though. It's very serious, speckled with comedic moments, and quite calming. Visually, it's gorgeous. It runs at a pleasant fidelity with beautiful scenery and excellent cinematography. The water, the light, the dynamic environments. Every shot is easy on the eyes. Then, at times of importance or emotion, the show raises the bar and hits you with even higher quality shots. A quiet moment in the rain, a warm smile from a character, a girl witnessing a fleeting moment of movement, experiencing it in slow motion. These moments, already beautiful, are elevated to a level that strikes you deep in the heart. Essentially, Akebi's Sailor Uniform asks the question, what if you made an innocent cute girls doing cute things slice of life, but without the tropes and with great visuals? The answer is that you get a fun and youthful series full of easygoing coming-of-age feels and impressive animation. Number 8. Spy Family. A spy for the nation of Westalis, Agent Twilight must infiltrate neighboring nation Ostania to gather intelligence and avoid a war between the two countries. His mission requires him to assume a false family, which he quickly assembles through various means. However, unbeknownst to him, not only is his fake wife an assassin, but his newly adopted daughter is a psychic as well. The first thing I want to say about Spy Family is that it absolutely nails its aesthetic. People may argue over the exact time setting, but the show certainly took from more than one era. The fashion was very reminiscent of the 1960s, with women's clothing looking straight out of a magazine from 60 years ago. The men's outfits harken back to that time as well, or perhaps even earlier, when hats and slacks were the minimum and everyone was preoccupied with classy appearances. The architecture and buildings reminded me of a mixture of old Europe and classic America. The shops looked like the streets of Paris in the 60s, the business districts like the gray bureaucracy of Russia in the 80s, and the homes a little like the historic brownstones of New York City. The political and cultural climate also felt right out of the Cold War era of the 1980s. The espionage, the tradecraft, the deep covers, it all painted a great picture of the type of riveting information warfare that can only take place during a tenuous peace. A great deal of effort went into building the visual foundation for this show, which went on to serve the story very well. In terms of plot, I'll be honest. When I saw the first core of Spy Family in the spring season, I thought it was a little overhyped. I thought it was good, and that it did a really good job of establishing the world and its aesthetic, but I didn't like it as much as everyone else did. So why is it in my top 10 of the year? Because the second core in the fall made me realize that I was looking at the show the wrong way. If you were like me and hadn't read the manga, you might have approached the show as an action spy thriller with just a sprinkle of comedy. That expectation of mine really framed my perspective going into it. So when the plot seemed to move very slowly and we got far more low-stakes fluff than actual plot development, I was pretty lukewarm on the whole thing. It wasn't until I was a few episodes into the second core that I realized I was being thoroughly entertained by what were essentially mild plot developments among a mostly low-key familial atmosphere. It got to the point that I was enjoying the slice of life elements far more than the actual plot. The plot was still there and moving along, but I started gravitating more towards the characters' relationships than the events of the world. And that's when I realized I had it backwards. This wasn't an action spy thriller with a comedic and familial subplot. It's a charming story of found family with moments of intrigue and action. The moment that clicked for me, I was all in. Though it still has a lot of action and intrigue, Spy Family presents this unexpectedly warm and therapeutic refuge within its tense regional Cold War. And not in a low-stakes, sugary sweet way. It's earned and worked towards by the characters. Every fun moment feels natural, not cliche, tropey, or fan-servicey in the least. It has a lot going for it, and I'm very happy I was able to overcome my initial sour impression. Overall, Spy Family is an expertly crafted world with enjoyable characters and a warm yet thrilling story. Easily one of the highlights of the year. Number 7, Call of the Night. Every so often, a show comes along with so much vibe and musical aesthetic that you just can't ignore it. You think of Cowboy Bebop, with its noir grittiness elevated by Yoko Kanno's jazzy compositions. Fooly Cooly and its themes of maturity and youth set to the rock stylings of The Pillows. Or the chill and hip Samurai Champloo, with its potent hip-hop rhythms from Nujabes, Tsuchi, and others. Now, I'm not saying that this show is on the same level as those other 3 shows, but Call of the Night's portrayal of nightlife as freeing and taboo, bolstered by its stellar hip-hop and soothing vibes, felt like an instant success. Disillusioned with school and his life during the day, high schooler Ko stays up late and sneaks out to enjoy the night. His nightly excursions are always calming and enjoyable. That is, until a strange girl named Nazuna befriends him and shows him a side of the night he had no idea existed. One thing that Call of the Night did very well right from the beginning was set a tone. The viewer is immediately hit with eerily quiet cityscapes and haunting color schemes. There are no people, the buildings are bathed in streetlight, and the sky is otherworldly. The lighting, the colors, and the sound all painted a picture of a world that had paused, a rare sight reserved for those who exist outside of normal society. Stepping into that world felt forbidden and freeing. That's the atmosphere that Call of the Night began with, as it explored the freedom and delights that can only be found under the cover of darkness. And I'll be honest, I was really worried that this would get old fast. I've seen shows that rely too much on their aesthetic, and they usually lose their luster after a couple of episodes. But Call of the Night did a great job of rounding out its vibe with its cinematography. Subtle changes in lighting, focus, FOV, and camera distance work together to amplify emotions and make character interactions feel transcendent. Outdoor scenes were often framed from odd angles or from a distance, never failing to establish the city as the stage for the characters. Silence was used to great effect as well, letting the atmosphere of a scene saturate and giving emotional dialogue time to breathe. To me, it was evident that a great deal of thought was put into storyboarding and directing this show. Of course, the centerpiece is the relationship between Ko and Nazuna. The two of them have great chemistry, and a comedic dynamic not unlike that of a funny man and straight man duo. Their back and forth was always fun to watch, especially when Ko's deadpan delivery would flabbergast characters or trigger Nazuna's glass cannon response. And as the show progresses and things get a little more serious, seeing them work through their feelings about each other is very rewarding, not only from a character development perspective, but also an emotional reasoning one. The emotional weightlifting in this show should not be underestimated. Every character has their own issues to work through, and the emotional complexity they display as they figure themselves out was very refreshing. The internal conflicts in this one are not simple, and it was nice to see an anime that lets its characters show their work in solving their problems. Visually, it didn't disappoint either. The character designs were somewhat rough in their style, but it was a deliberate decision that played very well. Everything was still crisp and colorful. Close-ups were super detailed, and lighting was animated masterfully. There wasn't a bunch of action, but there were still many scenes of beautifully animated movement and sweeping environmental perspectives. The animation, while not appearing super complicated at first glance, was deceptively detailed. And tone-wise, it was less of a romantic comedy than I thought it'd be going into it. In fact, it wasn't really a romantic comedy at all. It leaned more supernatural and dramatic slice of life. I guess you could call it a slice of nightlife. Simply put, it was a very well done show. If you're someone who needs a lot of action or you're not big on shows with a heavy aesthetic, it may not be for you. But for me, it was a show that I look forward to every week during the season. It's a perfect accompaniment to those late nights when you have a drink in hand and you just want to watch some anime. Number 6, Demon Slayer, Entertainment District Arc. I was one of those people in 2019 that lost their shit at Demon Slayer. It felt like a breath of fresh air in the shonen genre, with its clever combat and a protagonist that actually has a reason to cry. I mean, the dude's whole family died, whereas Midoriya cries when the wind blows. Anyway, after Season 1 and the Mugen Train arc, I was super hyped to see what the next installment had in store. And I'm happy to say that, although I don't think it was as good as the first season, Season 2 definitely didn't disappoint. Following the death of Rengoku and a long recovery period, Tanjiro and friends accompany Sound Hashira Tengen to the Yoshiwara Red Light District to help him find his wives who had gone missing. What they find instead is a new and powerful demon. Do you remember from the intro when I talked about my criteria for my list? About how I consider all the things a show does and how well it does them, and how a show that does 5 things very well and a show that does 1 or 2 things but near perfection might be comparable? Of course you do, because you definitely watched that part. Well, Season 2 of Demon Slayer is such a case, because I honestly thought it was lacking in a few areas. The plot didn't have the depth of its previous season, there wasn't a lot of growth for a lot of the characters, and it was the least dramatic story arc yet. However, I thought it more than compensated with its strong action, stellar animation, great fight choreography, and intense focus on villain motivations. Whereas other shows will use a handful of cuts and quick sequences to construct the general idea of a fight, this season of Demon Slayer offered sustained and complete coverage of its fight scenes. The viewer is given the full breadth of a fight's choreography, on the level of a well-rehearsed live-action martial arts film. And as the fights kept escalating in both intensity and scale, every scene became an oh shit moment. There was one villain in particular whose design and fighting style was beyond complicated. Their abilities allowed them to fight in 3D space to an extent that I honestly don't believe I've seen in anime, at least not in physical combat. It opened up so many possibilities and elevated the complexity of the fight choreography. The effort that went into visualizing and storyboarding this arc must have been Herculean. But it's not enough to just have good fight choreography on paper. You of course need to have the animation quality to bring it to life. And just like the previous season, Ufotable pulled it off. They once again pulled out all the stops, offering what might be an even greater performance than last time. Because not only was the action and degree of detail at an insane level, but they also incorporated more difficult animation this time around. Compared to the previous season, I thought this one had a lot more slow motion. Because with that increase in fight complexity and 3D space, comes the need to slow down and show the viewer exactly what's happening. In those moments, the animation never suffered. It didn't stutter, cheapen out on frames, or shy away from animating the character's full movement. It gave you everything. Also, one thing that I don't think a lot of people gave it enough credit for was the quality of its 3D animation. This might have been because the 3D was used more on objects than characters, but I thought the blending of 3D and 2D was pretty seamless. It looked as good as the 2D, to the point that I bet people didn't even notice. Lastly, the show continued to do something that every Demon Slayer arc has done previously: humanize the villains. Few shows bother to flesh out their antagonists. and even fewer do so to the degree that Demon Slayer does. One moment you're rooting for their death, the next you feel sympathy for them for the life they lived up to that point. This element is what allows the show to keep Tanjiro feeling fresh and untainted by shonen cliches. He doesn't try to beat his enemies by simply understanding them more, but he also doesn't see them as 100% evil or himself as 100% righteous. He works to acknowledge their humanity while committing himself to bring justice upon them. That approach puts miles on his heart and makes him a better character with every battle. Overall, it was a solid installment in the Demon Slayer anime franchise. Not as much plot or drama this time around, but it raised the bar in action and animation and delivered the emotional weightlifting of its antagonists that it always does so well. I do think the novelty has worn off a bit since season 1, but damn, it is still good. Number 5, Bocchi the Rock. Bocchi the Rock was an absolute delight from the fall season that I don't think anyone was really expecting. Just by the premise alone, it sounds like a standard cute girls doing cute things type of show. A shy girl joins a group, makes some friends, and maybe she breaks out of her shell a little bit. That description sounds like a lot of shows. However, Bocchi the Rock uses its quirky style, situational comedy, and light drama to elevate itself to a fun and relatable tale of musical ambition and camaraderie. Introverted and seeking to change her ways, Bocchi learns how to play guitar in hopes of breaking out of her shell. She doesn't make any progress in her social life, but she does become quite skilled at the guitar. Now in high school and still suffering from social anxiety, she's approached by a strange girl who needs a guitarist. Unable to say no, she finds herself joining a band and being forced to confront her fears. I think the first thing you have to mention about this show is the visual flair it uses to convey Bocchi's anxieties and thoughts. Most shows would have settled for a simple voiceover of internal monologue. Instead, this show opts to use many stylized animation sequences to visualize Bocchi's thoughts and worries. Some are realistic and plausible, others are more metaphorical. What they all have in common is that they're visually entertaining, comedic, and incredibly artistic. Some of them are in 3D, some are live action, and some are a little more avant-garde. These moments define the show's narrative style. They were cool, effective, and incredibly quirky. I also mentioned earlier light drama, the other major aspect of the show. Bocchi the Rock isn't a hard-hitting coming-of-age tale, but it is a story about breaking out of your shell and not being afraid to express yourself. The main plot of the show is about Bocchi becoming comfortable with not only making new friends and socializing, but also with fully expressing her musical talent in public. This is made more entertaining by the fact that Bocchi is an incredibly skilled guitarist with a popular YouTube channel where she just anonymously shreds guitar. She knows how good she is, and the viewer knows how good she is, but she's lacking the push to get herself out there. And that's where the members of Kasoku Band come in. Each with their own fun personality, they all shepherd Bocchi along in the music scene and support her in her social growth. Seeing Bocchi learn to make human connections and how they help unlock her playing ability was very entertaining. The moments when she digs deep, searches for earned confidence, and attempts to unleash her true power were some of the most rewarding scenes I've watched in a long time. One other thing I don't want to go unappreciated was how cinematic this show was. It might have been easy to miss because it was done so smoothly, but Bocchi the Rock looks really good. It's not an action series, so don't expect it to knock your socks off with its animation. But there were some great directorial and artistic choices. Many of the scenes take place in small clubs, and the show does a great job of capturing that vibe. Many shots were framed from the corner of the room or with a wider FOV, establishing the setting and how the characters occupied the space. This approach allowed the scenery to play a much more visible role than just using, say, a medium distance shot of only the subjects. I also thought a lot of care went into how the subjects were positioned in relation to light. Whether on stage, in the back of the club, or on a dark street, light always fell in organic and picturesque ways. There were also some great action shots during musical performances, often from a fixed perspective as a character moved and played. Additionally, the show takes place in real-life Tokyo's Shimokitazawa district. So many shots are one-to-one recreations of actual physical locations, and the attention to detail makes every scene feel super tangible. Backgrounds and textures are practically rotoscoped and nearly photorealistic. light and shadows hit furniture and large structures in a way that feels natural. These choices bring a level of immersion that persists throughout the entire show. When the characters are hanging out in a dark club or backstage in the green room, the viewer feels like they're there with them. When someone is walking along the sidewalk under an overpass in the setting sun, you can imagine yourself next to them. The show does it so well that many Bocchi fans have been motivated to make pilgrimages themselves to the real-life locations. In the end, Bocchi the Rock was an entertaining, hilarious, and captivating show about breaking out of your shell. Full of great visual hooks and deceptively high in cinematic quality, it should be in everyone's top 10 list for the year. Number 4, My Dress-Up Darling. The hype over this show was well earned. It somehow managed to be sexy without being trashy, romantic without being cliché, and hilarious without being absurd. It did everything right and was one of the more fresh and maybe steamy rom-coms I've seen in recent years. Fearful of being ridiculed for his love of crafting Hina dolls, Gojo keeps to himself and avoids people. However, when the class introvert Marin learns of his skills and passion, she confides in him about her own love of cosplay. Recognizing Gojo's skill with fabrics and clothing, Marin asks him to help her with her own cosplay hobby. Other than having an intense interest in their respective hobbies, Gojo and Marin couldn't be more different. Gojo, the reserved and neurotic introvert, and Marin, the bubbly and loud extrovert. It's a story of opposites attract, and the joy of the show is watching the growth of their relationship, which sparks from their respect for each other's earnest approach to their interests. Gojo identifies with Marin's passion for cosplay and wants to support her. Marin respects Gojo's skills and admires his dedication to his craft. So as the potential for romance grew, I appreciated the fact that they never stopped respecting each other. Neither takes the other for granted or hoists an idealized image onto them, a common pitfall of anime rom-coms. Instead, they're both very considerate of each other and very self-aware of themselves. There were moments when both parties were concerned that they had disrespected or let down the other, and the guilt they felt in that moment was visceral. It was also sweet and made the romantic aspect of the show feel more genuine. The show also scratched that hobbyist itch as well, imparting to the viewers some interesting facts and techniques about making clothes and putting together outfits. I found myself wrapped with attention when characters would explain makeup techniques, the potential application of different fabrics, and the tricks to styling a wig. The degree of detail that went into the actual work of cosplay and crafting of clothes made the story feel real and made the situations the characters found themselves in more believable. Thematically, Dress Up Darling's message was very much about learning to accept yourself and not apologizing for who you are. Marin's unhesitating glee and acceptance of Gojo's interest in Hina dolls and the effect it had on Gojo was instantly heartwarming. And Gojo's steadfast respect for Marin's passion towards cosplay was admirable and made you root for him. The show had a lot to say about supporting your friends and never taking them for granted. I thought this theme was very well done, never feeling cliche. One last thing I also want to talk about is something that garnered a lot of attention: the fan service, for lack of a better term. Some people were quick to paint this show as nothing but fan service. It had some skin for sure, but the delivery didn't really rise to what I think of as fan service. To me, fan service is cheap and gratuitous, used as either a quick gag in comedies or an unnecessary element within action scenes. And it's very prevalent in anime. So anytime we have a show that features scantily clad characters, we tend to automatically call it fan service. But I think we should ask ourselves, A, does it advance the story? And B, is that story itself not a gratuitous, sexy romp? If the answer is yes to both, then maybe we shouldn't dismiss it straight away. I don't think substantive plot and sexy scenes are mutually exclusive, and I think Dress Up Darling is a fantastic example of that. Also, it's a show about cosplay and making clothes for someone, so it'd honestly be a little weird if there wasn't any skin. Anyway, it was a really good show. It was funny, had great characters, brought the feel-good emotions, had a message of self-acceptance, and gave us some honestly pretty hot scenes. Overall, one of the best romantic comedies in recent memory, in my opinion. An easy recommendation if you like rom-coms at all. Number 3, Lycoris Recoil. Like many others, I really enjoyed Lycoris Recoil. I thought the show managed to provide a great overarching plot full of drama and mystery over the course of the season, while striking a great week-to-week balance of explosive action and cute girls doing cute things vibes. Who would have thought that putting Vash the Stampede and Gunslinger Girl would make for such a good show? Japan enjoys a false peace, made possible by an assassin agency that executes those who cause harm and disturb the national crime-free narrative. The assassins are known as Licorice, young girls adopted as children and trained to kill. When an operation goes wrong and a Licorice is punished with reassignment, she is paired up with the agency's problem child, who also just happens to be the most skilled of them all. There were essentially two components to the plot of Licorice Recoil. The first was the conflict between the clandestine assassin agency and terrorists, with the major players of both being supported by a third party of shadowy philanthropists. That conflict is where the lion's share of the action took place, serving up some good geopolitical intrigue throughout the season. But on its own, this component was actually a little dry and too reliant on philosophical intrigue. So if that's all the show was, then I honestly would have gotten a little bored of it after a while. But that's where the second component comes in, the relationship between Chisato and Takina. Their dynamic was highly entertaining and funny, and I appreciated the depth of character they both had. The show managed to produce a great odd couple with fantastic chemistry, while also giving each of them their own captivating personal arc within the wider plot. And it's that juxtaposition that made the show great, with the wider conflict serving as a stage for the more personal relationship between Chisato and Takina. Pacing-wise, it was near perfect. There was absolutely zero filler, with every episode offering substantial plot development at an easy-to-follow tempo. But at the same time, they still managed to fit in great moments of color and comedy, such as a shopping montage or a humorous discussion about underwear, for example. Those cute girls doing cute things moments served to not only provide a fun contrast to the hard-hitting action, but also to further the relationship between the two co-protagonists, endearing them to the viewer. And as the plot began to heat up and the stakes got more and more real, a great tension began to take hold. What was surely just a fun shoot-'em-up with funny girls gradually became much more dramatic and emotional. It bubbled under the surface at first, slowly heating up until everything came to a head. It was on point visually as well. The animation was super clean, and the fight choreography fluid and easy to follow. I really appreciated the angles and perspectives they used in the hand-to-hand combat scenes. Much like the number 6 show on this list, Licorice Recoil never took shortcuts or cut around the action. The sequences took their time depicting the full course of combat from multiple angles, allowing the viewer to see the full breadth of the action. Nailing that fight choreography is difficult enough, but covering it visually, in a way that is both easy to follow and fully conveys the events, is no easy task. Licorice Recoil does that very well, and I couldn't get enough of the action. I even often found myself rewinding just to see the little flourishes and attention to detail. Overall, this one really had everything. Great characters, funny moments, intense action, quality visuals, good drama, cute girls doing cute things. It was an incredibly well-rounded show that did so many things so well. This show should be in everyone's top 10 list for the year, and it more than earned the number 3 spot on my list. Number 2, Chainsaw Man. Taking odd jobs killing devils with the help of his own pet devil Pochita, homeless teenager Denji lives his life begging for scraps from a local gang boss. But after he's betrayed by the gang boss and left for dead, Pochita sacrifices himself to let Denji live. Now a strange human-devil hybrid with the ability to grow chainsaws out of his body, Denji finds himself attracting the attention of the devil hunter Makima, who recruits him to join the government's public safety devil hunters. I think the first thing you have to mention about Chainsaw Man is that it looks good. Like, really good. Mappa can pretty much always be relied upon for good execution, and Chainsaw Man was no exception. This show was cinematic as hell. Through the deft use of FOV, camera angles, transition, and blocking, they managed to produce an experience that felt more theatrical than television. They also had this knack for capturing motion and the viewer's gaze that makes everything feel intense. From the deliberate movements of characters and still emotional moments to the macabre horror of the action scenes, everything on screen hits you hard. I mean, even the stylization and weight of environmental elements was nicely done. The attention to detail was extremely high. And of course, when speaking of the visuals, you would also have to mention the use of 3D, something that seemed to be somewhat divisive among viewers. I think most of it comes down to the fact that some people just don't like 3D animation as a whole. So it's not surprising to me that switching the subject of a scene from 2D to 3D in the middle of the action would ruffle some feathers. Execution-wise though, I think it was mostly well done. The stiffness of a 3D human frame was a little prominent at times I felt, but it wasn't what I would call bad 3D. There also seemed to be some confusion out there as to when 3D animation was actually being used. Personally, that doesn't really surprise me either. I thought Mappa's art style did them a lot of favors, in that it allowed them to sort of mask the use of 3D against the look of their 2D style. I guess it just kind of backfired with a small number of people who overestimated the amount of 3D, since it blended so well in some scenes. In terms of the actual world, like, the plot, I definitely enjoyed it. Interestingly, when I started it, I didn't think the basic bones of the story were actually very original. It's essentially a demon yokai hunting story, which is pretty much a common subgenre of anime. But Chainsaw Man adds so much to the mix that it feels like a fresh and new premise. And perhaps my favorite element of the show, the one that I feel gives it its own unique flavor, is the bureaucracy of devil hunting. Having devil hunting be subject to things like licenses, paperwork, and governmental agencies gives it a grittier cop or almost noir feel. It makes the show feel less mythical and more real world, less fantasy and far more visceral. It's also a good excuse for having everyone be in suits. All the characters look fucking crisp in their suits and long coats, and it works so well in setting the tone. That little touch alone does a lot to give Chainsaw Man its own unique feel and aesthetic. Another aspect of the show that gives it its own flavor is the concept of contracting with devils. It's a very interesting story element that drives the show, allowing humans to even the playing field with devils. It also adds some mystery and intrigue to both the fights and the plot. You never know what skill set or tactics will be shown in combat, or what power a character may be hiding. It makes the fights fun because they must be approached with strategy, and it makes the plot tense because you don't always know how a character will enforce their schemes. The characters themselves are also really enjoyable. Power is a fun source of comedic relief and explosive violence. Aki is a great straight man with well-written dramatic motivations. Makima is terrifying. Denji is, well, I don't actually have much of an opinion on Denji. His horndog nature is eye-rolling at times and his motivations aren't very interesting. However, I think that's the point. He starts as a blank slate, not really knowing himself or even the kindness of others. The reason I say I don't have an opinion on him is because there's not a lot to him right now, and I'm enjoying that. There's a lot of entertainment in seeing a character experience their own agency for the first time, and seeing them discover their own motivations and morals. That story, set against this visceral and cosmically horrifying world, is the heart of the show. Chainsaw Man is a well-executed show with great concepts and great storytelling. I thought it was one of the most enjoyable shows of the year, and the hype around it was more than well earned, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing more of it. And number 1, Attack on Titan Season 4 Part 2. Following the painfully abrupt cliffhanger of Season 4 Part 1, Part 2 dives right back in where we left off, kicking off with an explosive conflict between the Jaegerists and Marley. I know we're reaching peak saturation and that it might be a little too easy to give it the top spot, but honestly, Attack on Titan continues to hit it out of the park. It's never stagnant or formulaic. Perhaps it used to be, but it seems like ever since that turn in Season 3 Part 2, the show has just been constantly one-upping itself in all respects, always raising the stakes and building to a climax thousands of years in the making. This season offered no shortage of action, shocking developments, and long-awaited payoffs. I don't use the term edge of my seat very often, but it literally had me on the edge of my seat. It reminded me of Season 3 Part 2, which reframed the viewer's perspective on the whole show at the time. That season was so good that it made Seasons 1 and 2 better. Much in that same vein, once again, Season 4 Part 2 recontextualized the entire show. The past was fleshed out once more, and the reality of the world finally came to focus, allowing the present-day narrative to take the lead. It made me realize that what Attack on Titan has been doing this whole time is telling one story on top of another, the story of the present day with the story of the past as its foundation, except the former can't proceed without enough of the latter underneath. It's like a play being acted out while the stage is still being built. The scope of the world and characters is confined in the beginning since there's little foundation for them, but as the mystery of the past is dispelled, the stage gets larger. It allows the story to expand and add more players. Season 3 Part 2 expanded that stage greatly, allowing the show to grow into a much more dramatic and far-reaching plot. And now, with what may be the final piece of that stage, it feels like the players are now completely unfettered. With the stage of the past fully assembled, the players are now acting out the most consequential and impactful arc yet. And beyond that, I'm pretty hesitant to go into more detail about the season. It's difficult to write a non-spoiler review for any show, but even more so for Attack on Titan. With over 75 episodes of preceding plot and the ultimate culmination of this carefully crafted story at hand, I feel like the slightest breeze of a hint has the potential to sway the preconceptions of any anime-only viewer. So in terms of specifics, I think the most I can say further is that the season offered no shortage of action, shocking developments, and fruitful payoffs. So much of what has been sown since the show began was reaped in this season, and as the consequences of the past continue to narrow the path forward, I felt both exhilaration and dread at every turn. Watching this show feels like living through anime history. It's the anime zeitgeist, if there's ever been one. So for that, as well as the other reasons mentioned, it gets my spot for the best anime of 2022. And that's it, my top 10 anime of 2022. I'm sure it differs from probably everyone else's, but hopefully I'll have at least some of the same shows on there. I don't consider myself an anime expert by any stretch, but I do watch a lot of anime from just about every genre, so I feel pretty good about this list. But whether you fully agree, have a bone to pick with me, or want to suggest some honorable mentions, please feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all in the next one.